Ramona Thomas is an author of fictional middle grade and young adult books. Educational history and realistic fiction stories include IDK, a story about a boy's quest to discover the origin of his cultural food, the code switch, a story about two young best friends who compete for valedictorian. They learn how their communication style play a big part in who wins. Grandma's brown cookies renamed Dr. Wizmagic's position. A story about making healthy food choices and discovering the benefit of things that are organic and naturally brown. She's a California native who resides in San Francisco Bay Area. Married, she's an empty nester who enjoy hiking the beautiful Bay Area mountain trails when she's not busy teaching or working on her next story. Her motto is aspire to inspire. And on today's episode of Auditor Interview, it's my utmost pleasure and joy to have on the show today Ramona Thomas. How are you doing, Ramona?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing very fine, and I want to say that it's exciting to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So, Ramona, could you tell us about your book, IDK? How does this book come about? What inspired you to write IDK?
So first I'll tell you how it came about and then how what inspired me. So in America,
Mm,
Black people who have their own cultural food, our food is not named for the country where we're from, right?
mm,
So um, my first book, Grandma's Brown Cookies, basically gave me the opportunity to speak to a lot of students when I'd go to different schools and speak to the students. And oftentimes they would ask me, what other book did I plan to write? And I would tell them, I plan to write a book about soul food. Raise your hand if you can tell me what it is.
mm.
And I would only blank stares. None of the children would answer the question. They didn't know what soul food is. And so um, I guess that kind of was the impetus for me to think about how I could reach out to young people. The book is actually categorized for young adults to adult, and
Mm.
it's historical fiction because it actually has a lot of history, but told in a way that I think is palatable for any reader. So basically, the setting is that it takes place at a school, and it's a California kind of a typical California school. So we
Mm.
have a student from Nigeria, we have a student
Wow.
from Japan, we have a student from the Philippines, we have a
Wow.
student from France. So I tried to really mix it up as far as it being multicultural. So in this particular book, the teacher, well, the class is going to be responsible for the International Day program. They're going to have a
Oh.
program at their school. And so each student is to write a paper and give a speech about their cultural food. And so when the Black American child says that he's bringing soul food, they don't know what it is.
Wow.
And the teacher asked a specific, very direct question, which is name the origin of your cultural food. He is the only student who cannot answer the question. So the student from
Wow.
Mexico knows, the student from Nigeria knows, the student
Wow.
from Japan knows, the student from the Philippines knows, the student from India knows. So all of the students know where their cultural food is from, except for the Black American student.
Wow, that's quite amazing. I love the sound of the making of the book. Sounds very intriguing to me, especially with
Thank you.
that just little illustration. Sounds amazing. Now, I also see that you have another book titled The Code Switch, which I think
Yeah,
was co-authored by Vita Franklin. For
Yvette does.
readers who haven't read the
Yvette
book
does.
yet, without giving
Yeah,
much
so
information away.
here the code switch actually is about language. And
Oh,
at the very beginning of the book, what we have is a glossary of terms. So we show slang terms. I'll give you an example. So, for instance, if someone here says auntie, like, oh, my auntie, that actually is your aunt. Or if someone says, oh, that's bootsy, it actually means that it's uncool or boring. Or if someone says Evie, like, oh, everybody, well, it's really everybody, right?
Wow.
So very beginning of the book, we have all of the slang terminology, which people speak more colloquially, and then we have the standard English. And throughout this book, all of the colloquial and or slang is underlined and italicized. And basically the book is more about a conversation between two best friends. There is also, it takes, the setting is a school also, and there is a healthy food component because the president of the student body, they're going to have a school dance and they have to vote on whether or not they should change the food to healthier choices. But throughout the story, say you and I are speaking, we're having a conversation. Every time I say something in slang, you would answer me in standard English. So you would speak more formally, whereas one of the students speaks more colloquially, and they end up being the students that compete for valedictorian. So the idea behind the book is, what is the importance of language and knowing when to switch? So even in your culture, you have some slang terms that you use, but you would not necessarily use those terms if you were going for a job interview. So this is really to teach young people that there's a time and a place for where you use certain types of language. And but it's a fun book because you kind of get really, I want to say, you feel a connection to the, you can build, there's a connection that happens with the characters.
That's amazing. And even knowing with the fact that it's a co-authored book, I would love to ask you, how does it feel to co-author a book? How does it feel to work with another author on the project? Would you love to talk about that?
Oh, sure. So Yvette and I, it's really interesting. We actually met at a hair salon, and she was a school teacher, and I was writing. I had already written my first book, and I had the idea for this book. I always had this kind of looming in my mind about writing a book where there would be two best friends that compete for valedictorian. And because I knew she was a school teacher, one day I happened to ask her if she would be interested in collaborating on a book. And she was elated because she had never thought of doing that. She hadn't written before. And I think since this book that she and I wrote together, she's probably authored 2 or 3 others at this point. But a lot of this book was done while I was driving, and we talk on the phone and we talk about the characters. And she and I basically decided that she would take on one character and I would take on the other character. And we basically kind of started out meeting together face to face, working on the book. And then in the end, we kind of finished it over the phone. So we just talk on the phone and, pretty much type everything up and, collaborate it back and forth. But so that was it. That was really interesting. And then we did some book signings together and started doing some different events together as we were promoting the book.
Yeah, that's quite lovely to know. That's quite amazing to know. Thanks for shedding some light on it. Now, Ramona, as authors, we all have different ways of reacting to feedbacks and criticism of our works. I'm curious to know your opinion about criticism. How do you react to negative reviews of your books, if you've ever had one in time past?
Well, I have. And for instance, my first book, Grandma's Brown Cookies, couple things. I have a bookseller. She has her own online bookstore, and so she would get feedback, right? So the character on the book, I don't know if you can see the character space on the front.
I can see the head.
Criticisms was that the character, when I first wrote the book, it was actually a hardcover book, and the characters, like the hair didn't have any texture to it, and the skin was a little bit lighter than it is on this picture here. And so she told me that she was getting criticisms that the boy didn't look Black. And my response was, well, the book is for everyone. And initially, I didn't want him to look like he was any particular race, because I want all people to feel comfortable and want to read the book. She told me that. I said, oh, okay. So when I had the next set of books come out, I had the illustrator add some texture to his hair, to make his hair more texturized. And she was able to make him more brown. However, I didn't really think that was the most important thing in the world. It's just for me, I didn't think that. But anyway, that was a criticism that I had received. Also, one of the concerns I had was that the book kept showing up with cookbooks online, and it's not a cookbook at all. It's a book about a boy who receives a potion in his ear, and the potion gives him the ability to hear food in the grocery store speak to him. And so when he's hearing the foods in the grocery store speak to him, he's able to make healthier choices because all of the organic foods are saying, no, tell your mother to buy me. So whenever the mother is reaching for the refined product, like refined sugar or refined flour, or their other refined products, then the food would on the shelves in the grocery store was saying, no, have her buy me, I'm healthier. So really, the point of the book is for particularly young people, but anyone, to accept what is natural in them, right?
Yeah.
And to learn to take care of their mind, body, and spirit. Yeah. And basically, by all of the healthier choices being organic, hopefully that gives the reader, especially at a young age, like, wow, I didn't know all of these things that are better are brown. Maybe I should like my brown eyes more than I have in the past, or my brown have, or my brown, So it's food is something that everybody I think can relate to. We all like each other's food. Like I like, jollof rice and moi moi, right? But I also like Italian food, and I like the Japanese food and Chinese food and Black American food, etc. So I think I use food a lot in my books because it's kind of something that's very neutral. Like we all can appreciate food. Sometimes people don't appreciate each other, but they'll appreciate your cooking. They'll appreciate what you eat. So that's why throughout this book, and it's kind of whimsical, but this one is a middle grade. So this is for like age 8 and up. And yeah, like starting at middle grade. Here in America, middle grade is 8 and up, like 8 to 12. And then when you get to what's called young adult, it's 12 to 18 and older.
Yeah.
So the two books, The Code Switch and Grandma's Brown Cookies, are both for middle grade, and the genre is under children's books. But I would say that Grandma's Brown Cookies and Dr. Wizz Magic's Potion are fantasy fiction, whereas The Code Switch is realistic fiction. And then you have BK, which is historical fiction.
Yeah, that's amazing to know, actually. I love your description of this. It sounds very intriguing to me. So, Ramona, could you briefly tell us about the making of your other book, Dr. Wizz Magic's Position?
Is a concoction. So she made the medicine that was going to be put in the child's ear. So it's a potion, like a magician could make a potion. And the potion is what gave the child the ability to hear the food in the grocery store speak to him. So basically, this book right here kept showing up. Grandma's Cookies was showing up in the cookbook section. And so I took the same book and changed the title. So this is basically the same as Grandma's Brown Cookies, but the difference is that this one has an easier to read font. It's the same exact story. And Dr. Wizz Magic in Grandma's Brown Cookies is Dr. Wizz Magic, who actually made the potion that gave this child the ability to hear the food in the grocery store speak to him. So in the end of the story, there is an organic cookie recipe that goes along with the story. But the message is the same, which is to increase your awareness of reading nutrition labels when you're shopping. Most of the foods here they're required to have a nutrition label, so the person knows what their sugar content is, what the carbs are in the food, what the fats are in the food, so they can make a better informed decision on what they're buying and what they're going to be consuming in their body. So the point of that is that it teaches people from a very young age to read the nutrition label, but also to know that the things that are healthier are organic, not necessarily those things that have been bleached or stripped of their nutrients.
Wow, that's amazing. I love the sound. I love the sound of Dr. Wizmagic's brochure. It sounds very intriguing to me. Now, I was going to ask you, how did you get the, inspiration, or I would say love and, admiration for writing under the genre of children's literature? What exactly piqued your interest in terms of children's literature?
Well, I believe that the more you read, it expands your mind. And I don't believe you should wait until you're old to do it. And I think that the more that we teach young people, the sooner they learn to appreciate books and to read, the better.
Absolutely.
But because all of my books are educational, so
Yeah.
they are in libraries. In fact, all three of them have just recently been added to 2 libraries here in the county where I live. They are they're educational books, but they're fun to read books at the same time. And that's important. So it's important for everybody to read and for everybody to learn. But I think that the sooner you do it, the better. And that is the reason that I chose the genre of children's books, because I think early education is important. And I consider these books to all be in the early education stage for the reader.
Yeah. I love that. I love the sound of that. Now, you also have a book titled Grandma's Brown Cookies, and I think you've showed it to the camera earlier on. Could you tell us about the making of it as well?
Yes, what I was sharing with you is Grandma's Brown Cookies and Dr. Wizz Magic's Potion are the same book.
Yeah.
And what I was sharing with you is that Grandma's Brown Cookies was showing up with cookbooks, and it is not a cookbook.
Oh.
It is a book about making healthier food choices. It's a book that teaches the reader how to read the nutrition label, the importance of reading the nutrition label. It's a book that teaches the reader that things that are brown are good, that are organic. So therefore, it has a message of acceptance of what things that are natural and organic. And hopefully, if a young person is understanding that things that they are consuming that are organic are better for them, they'd have a better appreciation for the things that are organic in themselves. Because oftentimes we are taught to compare ourselves to others.
Absolutely.
And to measure ourselves by others. So the importance here is that you're not measuring yourself by someone who has green eyes or blue eyes or hazel eyes, that you can be accepting of whatever you have. So if your eyes are brown, just like he chose the organic ingredients for the cookies, you would hopefully, as a young person reading the book, you would want to accept the things that are natural in yourself. But those 2 books are the same. But the reason it was changed to Dr. Wizz Magic's Potion is because Dr. Wizz Magic's Potion does not sound like it's a cookbook, and therefore it is not found with cookbooks when you are searching for the book. I'll tell you a little bit more about IDK. So that was introduced this year. It came out in April of this year. And as I mentioned earlier, that there are students from all different ethnicities. It's a typical California classroom, because here in California, we have students from the Middle East in a class. We have, students from Europe, students from Africa. So American students. So for the most part, you're going to have this very blend of cultures in the classroom. And because the boy who's American didn't know where his cultural food comes from, he had to go to his village. His village was his parents, his grandparents, and they explained to him how the soul food, got his name, but not only how soul food came about in terms of the name, but what foods traveled on the slave ships from Africa that we eat today. So for instance, okra, black-eyed peas, collard greens. These are things that are traditional Black American foods that many Black Americans don't realize originate in Africa and traveled to America during the slave trade. So the book culminates with a speech. Each student has to give a speech about their cultural food. And so it's really a journey for the Black American child who is learning for the first time where his cultural food originated.
Wow, I actually love the sound of IDK. It sounds quite intriguing. Sounds like something I would love to read afterward. Thanks for sharing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, could you also tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? Are there any challenges you've encountered ever since you got published?
Yes. So the first book, it was prior to KDP. It was prior to, I used a company out of New York called Books Just Books, and literally they shipped like a pallet of books to my house, and I literally was selling the books, from my home. So then later I worked with Create Space that was later acquired by Amazon, and Amazon now, I guess they took over whatever Create Space had. But in any case, this most recent book, because I am not an illustrator and I don't do desktop publishing, I used a company out of India that actually did the desktop publishing for me. So it's a challenge sometimes when you're not working with someone directly and you're doing everything through email, and there's a lot of back and forth on what you want. And then when you send it to the printer, sometimes there's an issue with if the cover isn't the right cut or size, or maybe one publisher uses a different type of paper, and then that might change the size that you need to use for what you're submitting. And then also from editing standpoint, I did most of the editing myself, which I think once I sell a lot of books, I may actually have someone else read it just to double check for most of the edits. But it took me a long time because every time I would submit it and then I would get it back and I'd reread it, I'd find a mistake or find a change I needed to make. And so, as I said, I really spent a lot of my own time doing the editing. And at some point, I would hope that I could have a professional editor look at everything. And not to say that it's not good, because my books have been vetted and they are in public libraries. You can't get your book in a public library unless it's been vetted by a librarian who agrees that it meets a certain standard. So they are meeting the standard that's required for it to be in a public library, which is also a good thing.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, I'd also love to ask you, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book? What would you advise people in this category?
I think the biggest advice is to keep writing, because what happens is a lot of times people have great ideas, but they might be reluctant to put, the pen to paper. Absolutely. I happen to write longhand first before I type it into my computer, but everybody does differently. Some people would prefer to go ahead and type everything into Word or whatever. But I personally like to write, longhand. I also think that it's good to have a tape recorder. So sometimes, you might be getting ready to go to bed, or you might be somewhere and all of a sudden a thought comes to you, or
absolutely.
And then you go, gosh, I need to change that for my book. Well, if you just record yourself, what I would do? I used to call myself. I would literally call my own phone number, and then I would leave myself a message.
Well, that's good. That's a good idea.
Like using a tape recorder, I would just pick up the phone, call myself and say, hey, don't forget to change, Yeah. So that really helped me though, because I didn't have a tape recorder around and I didn't always have time to write it down. I would just call myself and leave myself messages. And it's a little weird when you are checking your messages and then all of a sudden you hear yourself leaving yourself a message, but it's kind of a good way to, not forget things.
Yeah, that's actually a good thing. Sometimes I used to do recording to myself. I'll press recording and leave a voice so that, yeah, do this, add this to this particular part. That's one thing about writing. The ideas can come to you even at the point that you're not yet ready, and you just have to do something to pen it down just so it doesn't fly away,
Yeah.
Now, Ramona, in case we have some interested viewers who would love to get a copy of your books, on what platform are they available on for purchase?
So they're available on Amazon.com, and they also are available on my website, which is ramonasbooks.com. And then they're also available through a local online bookstore, ashaybythebay.com. So we have those three, and soon to be available on Ingram, but not yet. I'm on the process of getting.
That's great. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Ramona Thomas books directly on Amazon. So thank you so much, Ramona, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. It's awesome having this conversation with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.